Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Comic Book Wednesday. This is an epic world's finest collaboration between the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage, where Michael K. Vaughan and I take a look at the comic books on which we have wasted a huge amount of our youth, and in Michael's case, an absolutely staggering amount of money. Uh, we started out with me glomming onto one of his regular features on his channel. You are all in danger of that. It could happen at any time. I could find something interesting on your channel and say, hey, let's do this together. It's the price you pay for dealing with a super sexy influencer. He started out with an Epic Wednesdays run through of Marvel Comics full color paperback Epic collection reprint line. Really good reprint line that's ongoing. They do one a week. And once I glommed on, we started talking about comics back and forth, and made two decisions. One was to let him pick what we're doing week by week, which sometimes is a decision that I have deeply regretted. And the other decision was to range away from just Marvel's Epic collections, to range all over the comic books that we have both read and enjoyed. Or in the case of last week, the comics that I hated. Because last week, Michael put me through the torment of reliving the 1970s, which nobody in their right mind would want to do. Specifically, Marvel Comics' wretched horror comics from the 1970s. And this week, we're doing something completely different. It's still not back to an Epic collection, but I do believe it's a kind of subtle, implied apology for the ordeal of last time. Because this time, Michael picked not only a regular four-color superhero, but the greatest superhero of them all. And he went to a big hardcover omnibus that he has. He has a whole shelf of these things, a whole bookcase of $125 omnibus editions. And he went to this. This is Superman, the Golden Age Omnibus Volume 1. This is what it looks like. I don't have the thing. I'm one of the biggest fans of this character and his complicated history, but I wouldn't get those big, heavy hardcovers anyway. Even if I found them at a great price, even if I found them, up in Vermont at Listen for $10, I wouldn't do it because I don't ever use them. I don't ever pull them off the shelf, or every time that I do, I have a handful of them that I haven't got rid of. And every time I pull one off the shelf just to look through it, I think, well, this is an ordeal. It's too heavy to use on your lap. It's certainly too heavy to prop on your chest while you're in bed with your latest lover. They're too heavy and too unwieldy to use at all. Especially if you have the convenience of digital comics, where it's on the tablet, you can pinch into the artwork, you can study at your leisure, and it doesn't weigh anything. There have been paperbacks. What DC typically does when they do these big anthologies, these big omnibus editions, is to wait a while and then start splintering them off. So they'll do half or a third of this volume will come out as a paperback, reprinting just one part of the hardcover until you've got them all. And in a canny marketing strategy, DC gives those paperback reprints of reprints different covers, so that collectors have no choice but to get them, even though they know they're duplicating what they already have. And what I would argue they largely don't touch is, I don't think many people feel different than I do in reality. They might say it, but I don't think even the most fervent comic fans actually pull those big omnibus editions off the shelf all that often. They're probably more ready to reach for a paperback. I suppose if I saw paperbacks of these, the paperbacks are quite nice. I suppose if I saw them for a great deal, I might get them, but not the big hardcovers, not at all. But fascinating to look at, just the same. Fascinating to relive this time period, just the same. This volume reprints all of Superman's earliest appearances in Action Comics, where he premiered, and then in Superman Comics, the title with his name on it, the DC Comics quickly gave him when they realized they had a runaway hit on their hands. Superman was the first superpowered costume comic book hero, and he's the best of them all. He has the simplicity of origin story, the inherent embodiment of good versus evil that until current year 21st century was the heart and soul of superhero comics. He has all of that. Now, if you want to know what the soul of superhero comics is in Marvel, and especially Marvel, but also DC, I can sum it up for you in one word. It's food. Food is the essence of superhero comics. Open an action-packed issue of Batman or Suicide Squad or the Avengers, and it will be 5 pages of characters sitting, eating. And they aren't just eating while they discuss, Kang the Conqueror or Fing Fan Foom. No, they're eating and talking about eating. So it's exactly, in Marvel's case, it's exactly what Marvel executives who are in charge of making Marvel comics, they're in charge of dictating what they will be like. And all of those editors have said that Marvel is not a comic book company, it's a lifestyle brand. So you will get really nice apartment layouts. You'll get lots and lots and lots of emphasis on food and how tasty things are and how great it is to have snacks and coffee with friends and how you really can't face Zemu the Conqueror until you've had your coffee. All that sort of thing. All that sort of YA garbage that is now completely governing almost all comic books. But once upon a time, it was that the hero, through hardship, would grow into the type of person who could fight evil because evil should be fought. Now, no, now, but once upon a time that was true, and Superman embodied that. This cover has, him breaking kryptonite chains, which is a little bit anachronistic for the issues that are actually reprinted in this volume, because kryptonite didn't really exist when these issues came out. And he has the bright sun behind him, which is the fundamental elemental difference between him and Batman, who you could say certainly in his time period when his issues are coming out in Detective Comics and Batman comics at the same time that these issues are coming out, you could easily say that Batman also embodied the pure, bright dividing line between good and evil and the obligation of strong, noble heroes to fight for good against evil. The reason that I'm saying all this to some of you who aren't familiar with the current state of comic books, it must sound like I'm repeating absolutely grade school level morality. And I am, and the only reason I am is because it's completely gone from superhero comics today. I don't know when the last time was you picked up a 4-color superhero comic book, but you will be amazed when you do. It's completely gone. So I have to mention things like good versus evil, good for the sake of good, that sort of thing, because you won't find it in modern comic books, where the X-Men are violent, extortionist segregationists, where the Avengers take cases based on money, and refuse them based on a lack of money, and so on and so forth down the line. And let's not even talk about the deep, weird, unhealthy psychodrama that was the writer Tom King's years on Batman. Years of that sort of thing, of him working out obvious psychological issues of his own through characters that are not his own. These characters are not your own. If you are a writer, an artist, especially a writer, these characters are not your own. You can vary the theme, you can give them varied and new adventures, but you can't fundamentally change them. You are a caretaker. They don't belong to you. They far more likely belong to the thousands and thousands and thousands of people who've grown up with them, especially if you haven't. So to hear a Marvel writer snidely, condescendingly say, if you don't like my politics, don't read my book, is just utterly stomach-churningly revolting. It's not your book. But anyway, why did we get on that little digression? Oh, because it's absent from these comics. That's why. This is the very beginning of Superman. This is his famous, the tiny little origin sequence in Action Comics, where we know that he was rocketed from a doomed planet, that he looks human, that he was found by an elderly couple, the Kents. They turn him into an orphanage. They then go to the orphanage and adopt him, and they raise him as their own and instill him with their moral values. That you must hide the freakish things that you can do and use the freakish things that you can do for the betterment of mankind. I've never really understood that. The second part, yes. The first part, no. Why do the Kents tell him to hide what he is and what he can do? I don't really understand that. It's been revisited many, many times as Superman's origin has changed over time. A lot of the beginnings of this character in the late 1930s probably come from the year 1930, when the creators of Superman, Siegel and Schuster, were teenagers, and like every other adventure-hungry reader in the country in 1930 or 1931, read Philip Wiley's novel The Gladiator, which is about a noble figure who experiments on his son to give him superpowers. And the main character in Gladiator gets superpowers. His skin becomes incredibly dense. His strength goes off the charts. He can lift a tank off the ground. He is able to leap super distances. He can't fly, of course, because that would be ridiculous, but he can leap. Let's say, I don't know, an eighth of a mile. If any of that sounds familiar to you, well, yeah, that is Superman. That is the character that we meet in that origin story written by Siegel and Schuster less than a decade later. They read Gladiator like so many other science fiction fans did, and they really loved it. It's really, really good. It's only botched in the final act. It's hammy writing, but then again, so are these issues of Superman. And they just transported that idea to the comic book page. They tweaked it a little. He's a survivor of an alien planet because they also loved the John Carter stories. So you get a little mix of everything in here with the added element of the period 1930s circus strongman. You would go to the circus to see the bearded lady. You would go to see the tattooed man. You would go to see the dog-faced boy. And you would also go to see the circus strongman, who was usually a big, hulking guy, who was genuinely strong, but nevertheless, the circus impresarios had muckied around with the weights, which is why the audience was never allowed to touch them in an unbroken sequence. You were allowed to touch weights as you were going in, try to lift them. That was often a gimmick in Midwestern circuses. There'd be weights out front with a sign on them saying that, Titano the Great or whoever is going to lift these weights in mere minutes once you've paid your 25 cents. Can you lift them now? And then they'd be immensely heavy weights, 500 pounds. So no one could do it. All the skinny farm boys would try to impress their girlfriends by trying. They absolutely couldn't do it. And invariably in the crowd, in such circuses, you would hear them say, well, this Titano guy can't do it either. If I can't move them, he can't move them. And then you get herded into the actual curtained off space with the stage, and Titano comes on stage, and you've got the weights right there on stage, and he handles them like toys because they're not the same weights. Because they've been toyed with, they've been hollowed out. But those circus strongmen always wore a type of one-piece leotard to emphasize their physique, but usually with an outer garment, a short pants garment around the business area, so that the audience didn't get any impure ideas. That's what it was for. That's why the costume looks this way in almost every fundamental superhero from this time period, because it was the nearest thing that artists could think of to what they were doing. Guys who are superhuman. Siegel and Schuster mixed all of those things together. The only element that they did not include in their original creation of Superman was business acumen. It's because they had none whatsoever. They knew right away. They had pitched the idea of Superman around many times to many places and had it refused. But once it took off, they knew perfectly well the gold mine that they had uncovered. And I don't know, maybe they had never had a chance against a big corporation, like the publishing syndicate that was running Superman and that was suddenly flooding the market with Superman. You had Action Comics, then you had Superman Comics, you had dolls and decoder rings and memberships in clubs and lunchboxes and a radio show and serialized comic strips and a TV shows and then movies. It was quickly extrapolated into a gigantic bonanza of money, from which Siegel and Schuster got notoriously little. That's a shame, and that shame is always connected to the character of Superman, and is in a very Byzantine way that we don't have the time to get into it here, and I'm not even sure that I understand it. That is also at heart one of the reasons why we don't typically get the Adventures of Superboy anymore. We have a Superboy in the comics. In fact, I think we have two. But they're not Clark Kent when he was a teenager in Smallville. We don't have that anymore. And we did for a long time. Superboy, in his own title and in Adventure Comics, sold really well. Almost certainly it would sell well again. But it's not done, probably for complex legal reasons. I, of course, as you know, if you watch this channel, fell in love with the Superboy titles more than I did with the Superman titles. Probably because I encountered them first. Superman was already almost 20 years old when I first started reading him, and had by that point started to shift away from the Golden Age. The Golden Age was Siegel and Schuster, and then the new writers and new artists that were brought on board to handle the workload, gradually, gropingly trying to figure out who this character is. what is it that we've actually created? So his parents, who are dead, instructed him to do good and hide his identity. And he's going to do that, right? That's not a given. They instruct him to do that. He could say no, or he could say yes and then change his mind once they're dead. And what exactly can he do? What can he do? They originally said that he could outrun a train, that he was faster than a locomotive, that he could leap an eighth of a mile, and that nothing less than a bursting artillery shell could penetrate his skin. How Clark Kent would know that unless he's faced a bursting artillery shell, I don't really know. And it doesn't make a lot of sense. According to physics, the writers here and the editorial team behind the scenes at DC Comics quickly started to roll out the science behind Superman's powers. And that science has changed over time. There is no science that can really explain the flying, but the flying doesn't happen in these issues. Superman can leap, and he can do all sorts of weird things with his leaping. Let me show you an example of what I mean. He can do a lot of weird things that don't look quite like leaping. Let me see if we can get an example here. Yes, here we go. A man's car is stranded in a rainstorm on a road. Superman comes along out of nowhere and says, "I'll get you to your destination." A ragged figure obviously trudging toward the cabin. Want a lift? So Superman, we see there, he is lifting the car. Now, that kind of moment, fans just loved that. Absolutely loved it. A character who walks on stage and can lift cars casually. That is just amazing. That is the circus strongman, only in real life. Someone who really can lift a ton over his head, where the circus strongman could not. They only wanted your quarter. He couldn't actually do it. But if Superman is doing that, want a lift, he's leaping with the car, with the passenger inside it. And he spots somebody on the road and says, "Want a lift." Well, how does that happen if he's not flying? Right? His legs are in a leaping position, so it looks like he's just leaping. But how does he do that? Right? This kind of has to be flying. If he delivered this car to the doorway of the cabin by taking eighth of a mile leaps, not only would the car be completely pulped by the time he got to the cabin, but so would the people inside it. That's just how physics works. And you can't alter the position of a jump. It seems like he can fly. Like, for instance, look at this panel. Look at this panel right here. This is when he drops them off. He says, "I'm always happy to do a good turn for somebody." It certainly looks like he's swooping into the air, right? And later on in this same adventure, when let's see, I almost lost it there. When later on in this same adventure, when he's done with them, he has extremely sharp vision, but not yet X-ray vision or telescopic vision. Instead, he flies off to his fortress where he's running down the hallway in costume. And he says something that will endear him to you BookTube people. He says, "Now to relax and catch up on my reading schedule." Superman has a TBR. He is eager to get to it. But when something happens at that cabin where he's dropped these guys off, keep in mind, this is a standard mystery story. And that you often get that. You get pulp writing at enormous length with no Superman in sight. Just characters evolving a story, and Superman will be a part of that story, but only after pages and pages. He's reading in his mountainside fortress when suddenly he gets a news bulletin that the plot has progressed, and he leaps out to see what's going on. There's no harm in investigating. I'm not 100% sure that is Superman flying or Superman leaping or whatever. But you can see already, this was later on, you can see at this point the primitive, brutish Superman of the early Action Comics issues is going away. He is becoming more streamlined, brighter, better artists came on board. Better writers came on board. Siegel and Schuster had the original great inspiration, but they weren't very good at what they did. I know that's heresy. They kept working. So even after they knew that DC Comics was going to shaft them, they still kept working on Superman comics, but there was never any cause for celebration, I don't think. There were people up until just a couple of decades ago who used to wait in long lines. If Joe Shuster was in Artist Alley at a comic book convention. They would wait in long lines to get a sketch of Superman by him. And somewhere out there, someone got the last of those. Someone was lucky enough and persistent enough to be in line and get the last time this guy ever drew his own character. But for instance, in this same adventure, Superman is knocked out of the sky and crashes to the ground unconscious. A rocket has struck him in the sky, and we're told, meanwhile, rendered unconscious by the rocket blast and fumes, Superman crashes through the top of a circus tent. An instant before he can strike the ground, he revives. With the aid of his cloak, reverses the direction of his flight. And he says that's a close call. So, A, Superman can be rendered unconscious by a normal conventional rocket, and B, the narration seems to imply that he would be hurt if he hit the ground from that height. And C, when he recovers, he changes his course by manipulating his cloak. So you can see that the Superman that we really know wasn't fully formed here. This is a lot of that came from other medium. You got a Superman who could fly. You got a Superman who was basically invulnerable to harm. You got a Superman with a panoply of extrasensory perceptions. All of that was later, and a lot of that happened in the comic strips or in the Superman TV show, and just filtered back into the comic books. And what you might be wondering, okay, what's this golden age thing? Where does it start and where does it stop? And I know that comic book pedants, fortunately, I'm assuming that they, like most of you, will not be watching my video or Michael's video on the subject, but comic book pedants have a very strict idea of when the golden age ended. I don't even know what that idea is. But for myself, what separates the Silver Age of Superman from the Golden Age of Superman is one person, Julie Schwartz, who was a great Superman editor and an endless fountain of ideas for Superman. Most of what you think you know about Superman was not created by Siegel and Schuster. It was created by Julie Schwartz. For me, that is the real difference between the two periods. Is that this is a thuggish Superman who jumps around a lot and who mostly fights conventional villains. I think there's scarcely a supervillain, a so-called supervillain, anywhere in this volume. And later on, that becomes absolutely de rigueur. Later on in Superman, he doesn't fight anyone but supervillains. He doesn't fight criminals anymore, ordinary criminals that ruin people's lives. He doesn't do that anymore. And increasingly, Batman stopped doing that as well. Batman started out doing that, but same as Superman, but they both eventually stopped doing that. So, the days where you might get Superman thwarting a bank robbery as a teaser warm-up in a new adventure, but it won't be that he figures out the plot of the robbers and thwarts it in the course of a whole comic book. Fans would go nuts. They wouldn't want that at all. I would, but then again, my time with Superman is largely the Silver Age, not the present day of Superman, not the present incarnation of Superman, who is not even in his own comic book. Instead, it is his gay son, who has a boyfriend who has pink hair, and it's every single bit of Twitter virtue signaling and current year obsessions and hashtags that you could ask for. It's every single one of them all crammed into one issue after another. I've read a few of those issues that I got when I was up in Vermont, and they did nothing for me at all. It would be one thing if you had all of that Twitter virtue signaling, with the pink-haired boyfriend who's probably has multiple pronouns. The boyfriend has a superpower, and that superpower is that he can render himself completely intangible, and so Superman doesn't have to protect him, doesn't have to save him, because the ideologues that write Superman now hate the idea that Superman spent 80 years saving Lois Lane from harm. They view that as inherently paternalistic and patriarchal. So one of the ideological stalking points that they had to have in this new character, who has been planned for a long time. It's been planned for 5 or 6 years, that the quote-unquote new Superman would be gay and would be a teenager and would have a boyfriend who doesn't need saving. It's not possible for the new Superman, son of Kal-El, to save his boyfriend. His boyfriend can't be hurt. And that has just gone on with machine-like proficiency. The thing that bothered me most about the Superman, Son of Kal-El issues that I read up in Vermont is that all the characters in the story just refer to the character as Superman. They can look at him to see that he's 20 years younger than the guy that they've called Superman for the last 20 years. No one ever comments on it. No one ever mentions it. That is totally unrealistic. And the reason why it's happening is because the powers that be at DC Comics want to erase this character. They want to erase the character that Siegel and Schuster made and make it so that when you say Superman, you're referring in reality to his gay son. I don't know that they'll ever have the cojones to kill Clark Kent. I think they're going to faint in that direction, but one way or another, you don't need to kill the character to sideline them. So the golden age of Superman proceeded into the silver age of Superman when all of a sudden Julie Schwartz's creativity went through the roof and you get super everything, super cat, super horse, super monkey, super dog, a whole city of Kryptonians who are alive and shrunk, and you get a whole panoply of great Superman villains. And then you move on to the Bronze Age after that, which has very good highlights to it. Great artwork in a lot of cases. Kurt Swan, the great Superman artist, is not present in these issues, and isn't as present as I would like in most Silver Age Superman. But Bronze Age, he's in the full flower of his talent for a lot of that time. And this is a rare instance. I mean, I'm very grateful that Michael picked this book. Very grateful that we're recovering some ground that we lost while wallowing in the squalor of the 1970s. But in addition to that, this is a rare instance where I agree with him completely in some opinionizing that he does in his own video about this volume, which is to lament the crappy way that DC Comics is handling its own reprint culture. I mentioned at the start of this video a million years ago that Marvel has the Epic line, the Epic collection, and that there's a new one every week. It's high quality paper, it's bright color reproductions of a certain chunk of issues in a lot of their titles past. Marvel also has the Marvel Masterworks series, which is plodding onward, a strict chronological rendering, reprinting of every one of those titles in hardcover, so you can have a whole bookcase of Marvel Comics and know exactly what's what and when it happened. Those are both ongoing. DC Comics has nothing like that. Nothing like that at all. And they could. It's just money waiting to be made. They have these omnibus editions, it's true, but there are huge gaps of time between each one when then that need not be. The fans out there who are going to buy these things very much want more of them. And they're not going to save their pennies in a piggy bank. They're ready to buy them if you will make them. They will buy them if you make them. I feel the same way about the Legion of Superheroes, for instance, my own favorite production of DC Comics. They should be on big, fat, $125 anthology number 8 of the Legion, or something like that. I think they're up to 3. It's ridiculous. What are they doing with that? Yes, it costs money. It costs money to lay out the production costs of such a thing, but you'll make that money back right away. People are eager for these volumes. And what about paper reprints? Hardly anything. There's nothing in DC Comics like the Epic collections, for instance. There should be. Anyway, DC Comics, just from the Golden Age on, lend themselves a little less easily to the thought behind the Epic collections, because the DC Comics editorial policy for a long, long time, for decades, was to maintain an absolutely even look and feel to everything. So the Superman comic that you pick up in 1941 should be exactly like the Superman comic that you picked up in 1939. And if your editorial policy is that, you will not have massive peaks and valleys, runs on issues. And that's what the Marvel Epic Collection was sort of designed to capture. But DC could still do something, and they don't. They do virtually nothing. Michael, I'm sure, is eagerly waiting for the next omnibus volume of Golden Age Superman. I honestly don't think I would take them even for $2 at a library sale. They're not because I don't love that DC is doing this, but because I don't think I would read them. I don't think I would actually read them. But I certainly can applaud them. These are tremendous fun. You have to be sort of prepared in your mind for a large amount of every issue that has no Superman in it. That was just a standard thing. You see the same thing over in Detective Comics and Batman, where there is a standard pulp plot extortion, racketeering, that sort of thing. It requires an enormous amount of exposition to get off the ground and keep moving. There's just an added element. The added element is this costumed adventure. You just have to prepare yourself for that. That doesn't exist anymore. But once upon a time, for a long time, that was the standard rut of these comics, and I loved it. Absolutely loved it. So that's your Comic Book Wednesday for today. It's a piece of pure agreement on my part with Michael K. Vaughan. He loves these issues, and he also laments that there aren't more of them for us to enjoy. He is a perfect example of what DC Comics seems not to understand, which is that there are all sorts of people out there who've reached a point where they have a little disposable money. They will buy these things if you present them, and DC Comics routinely does not. Maybe that will change. Maybe they will watch these videos. The Lord knows somebody has to. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now. That is Comic Book Wednesday. Like I said, I let Michael do the picking, so I have no idea what's coming for next week. Could be another thing that's really great. Could be something that's awful. We shall see. We'll find out together. Thank you, BookTube.